certain things like Doritos just shouldn't even be considered food.
Isn't it funny that we think it's food?
That's why some people are like, oh, you're trying to make people scared of food. I'm like, that's not food. People talk about like bowel movements. Yeah, I want everyone pooping 1 to 3 times a day. That's like a question I ask every one of my patients. I mean, why don't people have bowel movements? 3 main reasons, I would say. I mean, look at the US versus look at people walking around Italy. Everyone eats gluten. Everyone eats ice cream. Everyone drinks espresso. Everyone smokes. Everyone drinks wine. What the heck is going on over there versus here? Does colloidal silver work as an antibacterial? Yes, it does. But silver is a known neurotoxin. No one can argue with that.
Welcome to Under the Sun Podcast. I'm Ilea.
And I'm Irene. Grab a cup of coffee and your comfiest sweats and join us every Monday as 2 best friends discuss everything from raising free-range gremlins to business and really everything under the sun.
Let's get started and thanks for being here.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode on Under the Sun Podcast. Irene is out today because her husband is sick. It's just me and Dr. Noah Lebowitz today. But Dr. Noah, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on here. My name is Dr. Noah Lebowitz. I run a practice in Maui, Hawaii. I'm a second-generation applied kinesiologist and chiropractor. Most of what I do isn't as a normal chiropractor. I focus on a lot of nutritional aspects of health with people, looking at different types of infections, viral, bacterial, fungal, parasites. I look at food and sensitivities, heavy metal issues, coagulation issues, and we take kind of a different approach to a lot of things. And it's a lot of fun. You know, patients, they never come to see us as the first person. They've already seen their 5, 10, 15. One person's seen 42 other doctors before coming to see us. And we try to take a step back and look at things very holistically, looking at the big stressors on the body. And our bodies were made to heal. I mean, we look at God-made bodies that should heal and we shouldn't be sick. And so if we can remove some of the big stressors that we shouldn't be exposed to, then people do really well and the body starts to heal. And that's kind of our goal.
Yeah, I always like to say that God doesn't design broken systems, people do. And so, yes. Like, if there's anything with like within our household that's struggling, I'm like, this isn't a design issue. This is a environment issue or a diet lifestyle issue. So like, let's correct ourselves because we're all just trying to learn as we go. Because like Irene and I, our mission in this podcast is to ask questions to smart people like you who, from like the mom's perspective, because like we are the healers of our homes. Typically, usually the moms are the driving force of like, hey, I see this in my kid. I see this in my husband. I see this in myself. How can I heal ourselves? So then let's step back. Like, what does it look like within your practice? What do you see the most? And what is the most like, I guess, common foundational issues that you see people kind of get wrong or are misaligned and that you guys help guide that healing process?
I mean, the 3 things I say are the most important in anyone's health is I think so many people have different what we'll call subclinical infections. So not like you're out with the flu or out with a stomach bug, but you have lower levels of viruses. That could be Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, different parasite infections, or different fungal or candida infections living inside you. And ideally, if our environment, our health was perfect, we would have fought them off and never gotten them. But if we can get rid of those, that's number 1. Number 2 is dealing with food sensitivities. I mean, there's a lot of food that people eat nowadays that just shouldn't be food. Let's be honest. A Dorito should not be considered food. A lollipop, generic lollipop should not be considered food. But then I think sometimes due to genetics, meaning like what part of the world we come from, or due to if you have infections, that's going to make you more sensitive to different foods that you eat. And so if you can avoid the foods that are causing inflammation, get rid of infections, I mean, those are the 2 biggest things. And then I always chime in, I think getting people off the wrong supplements is huge. And then getting people on the right supplements. It's amazing. I've had so many symptoms go away in people by taking them off their supplements. It was simple as that. And then they just really thrived. Wow.
That's sad. But like people are taking supplements because they're trying to feel better. Like everyone I feel like is just really desperate to find the thing to make themselves feel better. Because I don't know, thank goodness they're not all bad things about the internet, but like, you see these reels and you're like, oh yeah, this is the thing that's going to make me feel better. This is the thing that's going to make me feel better. And so we're all trying our best, but the more we know, the better we do. So when it comes to then the infections, let's start with you first off said infections. What do people do about that? For one thing, to mitigate parasites during their daily life, but also like get back into that balance. Like, is it like there are so many voices out there saying like, do this, do that, don't do this. And like, what do we do? Because I mean, I actually saw on your Instagram that you helped harvest a bunch of birds, process a bunch of meat birds. And we just did that on our homestead, and we're actually about to do it again this weekend. And it's awesome and it's awful, but like it's like our birds, we know exactly what they ate. We know exactly their lifestyle, where they came from, who bred them, all the things. But like not everybody has that opportunity to control where their meat comes from. Or buying organic vegetables. Like we have a garden outside, and now we're eating it like organic, like truly organic from the ground vegetables. But then there are some people online that are like, oh no, but there's still worms, and so they're still bad for you. And it's like, guys, I think we're supposed to coexist with worms. It's just a matter of, this is my perception, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm not offended, that like our bodies are so burdened by other things that we're actually not coexisting, they're taking over, and they're actually supposed to be involved a little bit. If that makes sense.
It does. And it's a tough question. I mean, I think, like you said, we're exposed to parasites, to bacteria all the time. I mean, we have chickens at our house. I caught my 2-year-old drinking out of the chicken water bucket, and who knows what was in that.
Oh no. So,
I can relate. Those things happen. And I think there's a few different aspects of that. I think one, if our immune systems were healthier, we didn't have all the external bad stuff that we're exposed to, we could fight things off a lot better. Or if we're exposed, like you said, we can keep it in check. If our immune system is healthy, if we're not eating sugar that's lowering our immune system, then we can keep small amounts of bacteria, parasites, different things like that in check. I always, the way that I practice medicine, I look at people and check what they are sensitive to. So like you mentioned, some people might have a parasite or have a bacteria that shouldn't be there, but that doesn't mean it's actually causing any of their symptoms. Their body might be able to keep it in check. So they might have a presence of something, but it's not causing an active issue. So I like to more evaluate for what is causing issues in people and then addressing them. And just like if you look at mold in a house, I mean, I would say it's impossible to find a home with zero mold. Obviously, you don't want lots of mold. That can be really toxic. But if the levels are low enough, your body keeps it in check and it doesn't overcome and start to cause issues. So that's kind of like you mentioned, I think some things is fighting it off naturally, and others is just keeping it in check so it doesn't start to cause a lot of symptoms and overrun your body.
Do you find that like food sensitivities are the driving force to inflammation and poor immune system that is causing these other things to be out of balance? Or is it like a cumulative effect of like environmental toxins? And I know it's a hard answer to answer definitively, but like,
chicken or egg, it's such a hard topic. I do think if people ate less junk, if they're not exposed to many environmental toxins, if they sleep enough, they don't overstimulate themselves. If they do those things, their immune system is going to be more robust and they can fight off infections much better. But I do think at times you do get infections, and that's normal in a sense, even if you do everything correctly. I mean, infections have been around, go back thousands of years, and they've been there, so they're nothing new. But I think back then our bodies were able to fight them off better. I mean, part of the thing of getting exposed to different infections, it actually builds your immune system. I mean, there's studies about if you get, what was the big scare that was going around recently? Everyone did measles. If you get measles, if you actually get measles, it decreases your cardiovascular disease risk like 70% or something.
Nice.
So it's really interesting of getting some of these things actually boost our immune system, and it makes us healthier in the long run. But there's this is something that my dad's taught for decades, is if you look in nature, animals, there's a lot of herbs that are very medicinal, and animals don't eat these herbs unless they get sick. When they get sick, they have like this innate, and they actually go and eat it. There's actually a really cool, there was a news article and a picture of this one, I think it was gorilla, and it was eating this certain type of herb. This is the first time they ever got a picture of it that it never normally eats, and it was actually fight off an infection that it had.
That's amazing.
So I think, you know, there's different types of worms, different types of bacteria, things that can stimulate our immune systems, and then God gave different natural things to help fight them off. Just like if you look at a lot of traditional cultures, I mean, what comes if you eat sushi? If you look in your plate of sushi, you got wasabi, which is a great anti-parasitic, and you have ginger. Unfortunately, if you get sushi in the US, you get horseradish with green food dye, and you get ginger that has sugar and it is pink, because they add food dye when it should be white. So you're probably hurting your body more than anything. But, you know, I think a lot of cultures added in, you know, lemongrass in Thailand. They add in a lot of medicinal herbs to their food to help prevent getting a lot of these illnesses. And we don't do as many of those nowadays as part of our natural diet.
We don't, and we're not connected anymore to nature. Like, it's interesting, like, let me just tell you a quick summary. I was a city slicker, like did not grow up on a farm at all, and definitely thought I was going to live in the city in a high, you know, like that was the thought I had. And then little, you know, 5 years later, I'm like, no, I'm on a homestead. I'm a mom. I have chickens. I have a huge garden. Like, no, this is the life I want. But it's interesting. I'm finding in myself like how disconnected I am to like not understanding much about gardening. You know, like, oh, like what does this mean? What is, you know, like I'm in a learning curve. And it's funny that like, you know, there was an instance, and this is just my thing of like, I was out and there was some basil growing. I was like, oh, I'm just going to take some basil. And then my brain was like, oh, wash it so there's no parasites. And I'm like, what? Like, there's just maybe, yes, but like, this is probably the most natural food I've ever eaten in my whole life. You know, I go to, you know, restaurants and who knows what's on it. But that's interesting about the sushi. I didn't know they dyed the ginger. I don't really eat sushi anymore, but how is it in Hawaii? Hawaii? Do you say Hawaii?
Hawaii. I mean,
Hawaii.
I don't eat sushi all that often. I mean, as a general rule, you're going to get, I mean, the more that you know about fish, the more you don't want to know about fish. You know, it's like if you're going sushi somewhere, if there's a worm in the fish, they just cut around it.
Oh,
you know,
no.
They don't throw away the whole fish or anything. That's just common, what even super high-end restaurants, what they do. And I mean, you know, ginger should look more white. It should not be sweet. It should not be red. So those are just kind of some things that you're like, oh, I'm not eating that if I do. So.
Not to mention in the U.S., it's sprayed heavily with pesticides and herbicides and insecticides and all the things to
that's
grow.
a whole nother talk you can go down.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what's been the most effective thing for you and your patients, like to boost the immune system, to set them up for success? For, I know it's different because it's a bio-individual thing because everybody's dealing with different symptoms and side effects, but
I mean, you know, there's some basics in terms of diet. Like I said, you know, certain things like Doritos just shouldn't even be considered food.
Isn't it funny that we think it's food? Like,
yeah,
I go to the store now that I know what I used to eat Jack's Pizza, breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time. And then now I'm like, none of this is real. Like, none of it is real.
That's why some people are like, oh, you're trying to make people scared of food. I'm like, that's not food. You know, I mean, that's a whole nother topic. You know, I mean, there's studies out there showing like if you consume white table sugar, it decreases the activity of your white blood cells for like 8 hours. So if you're consuming sugar, your immune system's going to go in the tank, you know, so there's things like that. I mean, I don't take all my patients off of gluten and dairy. I definitely don't. I mean, and I think that's very bio-individual. I think some people do fine on them. Some people do not fine on them. And there's a whole lot of variables in that. But, you know, I mean, the first thing, if you're homesteading, if you're eating whole foods, if you know where your food comes from, I mean, you're not going to be doing that bad of a job. It's impossible to, you know. So cutting out a lot of the pre-packaged processed food, that alone does wonders for people. I mean, the thing is, like, you know, nowadays, like sourdough, that's the big thing, especially with homesteaders and stuff. And I think if you can get an organic sourdough bread, it's amazing. It tastes good. It's the healthiest way to do bread. you can get into the conversation of should people be eating wheat in the first place?
Yeah.
It's a tough one because, I mean, people ate it Bible times. People have eaten it for thousands of years, especially if done correctly, especially like if you mill your own flour, because if you don't mill it, especially whole wheat, it goes rancid really fast from like the vitamin E and the wheat germ oil. So there's a lot of things you can do to make healthier. But even with that, I think due to just so many people have messed up their bodies over past Jack's Pizza, let's say, that they might not ever be able to do bread very well, even if it is the best. They can handle it better, but they still might not be able to handle it. So, you know, some things you just have to be open to trying. It's like, well, let's say I'm bloating or let's say I'm constipated. I'm going to give up all gluten and all my raw organic dairy for 2 weeks and see if I feel better. And if you don't, great, keep eating them. But if you do, then they might not be the best thing, at least for you at this time.
Yeah. I mean, so many of our listeners are like, I wish I was a homesteader. I wish we could do homesteading. And it's like, it's just not feasible for everybody. And it's honestly, it's not for the faint of heart. Like there's a lot of work into it. But there's all these trends of like, oh, sourdough, cold plunges, red light therapy. How do you feel about those? Because to me, it's replacing things that God already put in place for us. Red light, wake up in the morning, and go outside instead of shoving your face in your phone right away. Like, touch the ground. Like they make it like this big thing of like, oh, I'm grounding. It's such a thing. It's like, hey, that's a normal thing we've been doing for thousands of years. It ain't fancy. It ain't cool. It's just touching the grass. Like, I don't know. What do you think of all these?
I love grounding. I don't like grounding sheets. I think people just need to go outside barefoot.
Yeah.
I have not been a fan of grounding sheets. I mean, let's take cold plunge. I've done it a couple times. I don't own one. It was fun. I do think, a lot of things nowadays, and this is the same in like allopathic medicine, is you're trying to find something to help you handle your unhealthy lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
So, if you're going too hard in the gym or going too hard in this and you're inflamed, the cold plunge might help with that. Or, it can help boost dopamine if your neurotransmitters aren't correct and you're more depressed. That cold plunge can give you a surge, but it can also be a stress on your thyroid gland because of temperature regulation. It can be a stress on your adrenal glands. So it can be a stress on different things also. Like you mentioned with the red light. I mean, I don't own a red light. I'm not against it, but I'm not all crazy into it either. And I think, like you said, it's trying to help cope with unhealthy lifestyles, because ideally, if you can get outside in the sun, you can do these types of things. You don't need something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see a huge detriment to doing it. And if people feel better from it to help cope with their unhealthy lifestyles, great. There's a lot worse things they could be doing. And if it's helping, it's great. But I mean, people always ask like, oh, what are your favorite gadgets? What do you like to do at home and all these things? I mean, I really don't have much. I have a massage gun that I honestly don't use that much. And I have a chirp, which is a really cool wheel to roll on your back if I throw a rib out. And that's really only like the things I have at home. I mean, I'm a little more old school in that terms. Some of the gadgets look fun, but I just don't have them and I haven't found the need.
What does your diet look like for you and your family? Because you have 3 kids too.
At home, generally, I follow a loose animal-based diet, which this has changed from about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I would say I was more paleo, very heavy vegetable, good quality vegetables. We grew a lot, vegetables, fruit, some rice, quinoa, sweet potatoes, and meat. The past 2 years, I have mainly done meat and fruit. Those have been the main staples of my life. I've gone back and forth. At times I've done no starches lately. Well, the past year I was probably doing a lot of white rice, and now I am cutting that and switching over to purple sweet potatoes.
Okay.
Breakfast this morning for the kids, we had 2 very soft plantains. I added a banana. I added plantain flour, so definitely banana plantain heavy. Added applesauce, some coconut yogurt, some coconut milk, and blueberries and made pancakes and covered them in maple syrup for the kids. That was breakfast this morning.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And my lunch today is a purple sweet potato and leftover lamb and bison sausages from yesterday. So,
yeah. See, like, I think when people hear, oh, like cut out sugar and Doritos and all those things, they're like, oh, then what would we eat? It would be so boring. But a lot of those things contain, I mean, not only sugar, but like MSG, food dyes, all those things. So when you do make that switch the first couple weeks, it is a stark difference. Like this purple sweet potato tastes like nothing. I don't get it. But like you have to like almost reset your palate to where it doesn't crave those things. Like I know, like we just don't do refined sugar in our house. We do maple sugar, like maple syrup and honey, and that's it. We're not going to add refined sugars. And my kid, one time on a cruise, had some ice cream, and she was feral. Like she was feral, and I'm like, I don't want this all the time. So let's go back to yeah.
Totally. Like, and I mean, I think for a lot of people, you know, there's some people just want to go all gung ho. Let's just go 100%. Let's make the switch.
Yeah.
Other people need the gradual. So I mean, if you can at least switch from your regular Doritos to find an organic one, at least then you're not going to have the MSG. You're not going to have all the same chemicals that they add in. So at least I'd say it's healthier junk food, you know, but I'm still throwing the junk food label in. And my kids have that on occasion, you know, but then it's like, then you start to doing the more actually making your food simpler. You know what every ingredient is, those types of things. I think that's a step up. And I think that's what people should go for, but at least switching off of a lot of the processed stuff to organic, just even if you don't have the finances to go fully organic, at least you understand what ingredients are in there. And organic's not perfect, but it rules out a lot of the really bad stuff. Yeah,
for sure. So say someone, I don't know, like a client comes into you and like they've done all the things, like removed all the sugars and stuff, which I know there's actually there's a trend of like, oh, like it's gluten-free. But it's like, no, you didn't actually read the ingredients. It has still 30 ingredients. It's just gluten-free flour. It still has all the same crap. But like I get people ask me all the time. They're like, what do we do about this or that? And I'm like, you know, you can recommend, but usually I just like point people into like, you know, someone like you or someone else I've followed. But what would you say if someone came in and they were like, I've done the things that I can control. I shop organic as much as possible, or they try to get a meat from a local farmer or something like that. But like they're still having candida symptoms or I don't know, Borrelia, Babesia, Lyme. Like what is the starting point of like the kickoff for your for like a beginner?
I mean, so I definitely do, you know, it sounds like the person's eating well in the first place, which is great. I do evaluate people since, like I said, you know, some people I see do okay on gluten, others I don't, or like nightshades, which nightshades are tomatoes, potatoes, bell peppers, eggplant, paprika. And some people do well on those, but I actually, you know, they've only been in people's diets except for a couple small parts of South America for the past 200 years. Even Italy, they only added tomatoes in really about 180 years ago. So in some people, those can be big drivers of inflammation. So, you know, depending on their symptoms, I do a lot of evaluations, and some people I take off of that. It's not a blanket. It just depends on the person specifically. And then with infections, I mean, I mainly use herbs in my practice for infections. Like I mentioned before, herbs are medicine. You know, I look at herbs, you know, there's some herbs like seaweeds or some more gentle herbs that you could take daily, astragalus, comma. I think they're just good nutrient dense foods that you could eat daily. But then a lot of herbs, like I mentioned with the gorilla, I mean, I look at herbs as medicine. And if you take them when you need it, they can do wonders. But if you take it when you don't need it, it could cause upset stomachs or things like that. So they shouldn't just be taken for the heck of it, basically. But I use a lot of herbs that I call very broad spectrum. And that's the beauty of herbs, is they do so many different things. Like if you ask me my favorite fungal herb, it's probably going to be Malia, which is neem leaf. Favorite, and you know, that can be one of my favorite fungal herbs, my favorite anti-parasitic herb, a great antibacterial, and a great antiviral. So it hits all four categories at once. Or like I use Morinda, which is noni, or golden thread, which is Chinese coptis. And all of those are very broad spectrum. And when someone comes in, like let's say you mentioned Candida. If someone comes in with Candida, I'd almost guarantee they don't only just have Candida. People almost never just have one thing going on. They might have low levels of Candida. They might have bacteria. They might have parasites at the same time. Usually it's a smorgasbord of all of those. And, the beauty of using full spectrum herbs is they can go after everything at once. Because let's say if you have a parasite and you have Candida, if you take a prescription anti-Candida supplement and it kills that off, then basically the parasite says, ooh, there's open real estate. Let's grow. And then you might get a whole other set of symptoms. So that's why I don't like to go after one thing approach. I think a lot of people are too methodical in, okay, first we have to open these pathways. Then we have to go over the parasites. Then we can go after this. And in my opinion, it oftentimes doesn't work. Or if it does work, it takes months and years to get through it all. While I like to address as many of those factors as once, and people generally respond really well and feel better really fast doing that.
That's interesting because a lot of the things you see online is like, oh, you got to do the funnel first. You got to address, the colon, the cells, all the things. And I think for our listeners, we get questions all the time. It's we don't know where to start because everyone's telling us different things. Because they say oh, if you don't address drainage, then when you do all these things, all the parasites and toxins will be released back into your blood, and then you might actually get sicker before you get better, which kind of makes sense. But are you saying is that not accurate?
I find it not accurate. I mean, a couple things that you hit on. One, when I start someone on a protocol, I only want them to feel better. If you feel worse when taking something, it's the wrong supplement for you 99.9% of the time. Anything that's strong enough to help you when you need it is strong enough to hurt you if you don't need it. I mean, look at, I think it was in the 1800s, thankfully only for a decade, they used mercury as an antibiotic. Yeah, it killed the bacteria, but it's also going to kill you. Yeah. So things can be good, but also really harsh on the system. And I look at that as a negative. I always look at, okay, well, two things. With the whole drain funnel pathway, I mean, that's only come about the past 4 or 5 years after, in my opinion, a supplement company started to push that everyone had to deep drain first. I don't drain people first. I go after infections first, because if you're talking about the lymphatic system, what clogs up your lymphatic system? Maybe heavy metals, infections. So why would you work to drain the lymphatic system while you still have the things in the body that are clogging it up? Our bodies are made to heal. If you can kill off and deal with whatever is affecting the lymph system, the body will detox. I mean, people talk about bowel movements. Yeah, I want everyone pooping 1 to 3 times a day. That's a question I ask every one of my patients. Yeah. But you can go after that at the same time. I mean, why don't people have bowel movements? 3 main reasons, I would say. One is very common dairy in people. Definitely not for everyone, but dairy is very constipating in a lot of people. Number 2 is if you're low in magnesium. If you're low in magnesium, I often use magnesium citrate, and that gets the bowels moving. And third, I would say infections, especially parasites. So, parasites can cause constipation or diarrhea. And, I was just talking to someone the other day and I gave them a couple of parasite things and then their bowels actually fixed. So I didn't give them things to get them pooping and get their drainage going. I fixed the root cause, and then those symptoms just kind of moved along. And that's the approach that I take and my dad's been taking for 40 years now.
So then how do you feel then about that same, funnel thing, and then you have to take a binder with everything so that it is, basically they told me or we hear that it's like a sponge that picks up everything and sends it out through the detox pathways. Is that accurate? Is it somewhat accurate?
In my opinion, no. One with binders, I'm very careful. A lot of binders are very heavy in lead or aluminum or other things like that. And so you have to be super careful with what binders you're using. I use a bamboo charcoal Takasumi as a binder, and I love it. It's done wonders on patients, but let's say 99.9% of patients that come in on a first visit, I'm going after infections. Maybe 15 or 20% of the time do I use a binder. And usually, so most of my patients, I don't use one. If I do, sometimes it can be cleanup stuff as it gets killed off, but more so in my opinion, when I'm using a binder, it's because people need to detox chemicals or heavy metals. And I think a lot of the times when people are using binders, it's because they're using the wrong antimicrobial supplements. Those are causing inflammation in the body, and the Takasumi is helping to, or whatever, the binder that they're using is helping to bind up some of the inflammation to make the symptoms less. But I really, again, going after parasites or other infections, I rarely ever see the need to use a binder at the same time.
So maybe someone's listening to this and they're like, where would I get heavy metals? Where would I get toxins? I mean, obviously if they listen to our podcast for any amount of time, they know, injections have heavy metals. Foods are sprayed with herbicides, pesticides, insecticides, growth regulators, all the things. I used to work for Big Ag, so I've seen it all. Where else have you seen? Because that's new to me, that hearing that a binder could have heavy metals in it. That's new to me. I know
with binders specifically, look at bentonite or kaolin clay. If they say they're heavy metal tested, that means they're tested for lead, because some of them are extremely high in lead. Mm-hmm. But if they're tested for lead, great. Kaolin clay is made up of about 23% aluminum. Bentonite is very similar. It's bound to silica, so it has a high heat melt point, but it actually can get dissociated in acid, which is our stomach, where it's first going to go. Look at zeolite, a really common binder. What is zeolite? Doesn't matter if it says lab test or not. Zeolite, TRX, all those different types of things. It is aluminum bound to silica. So
Stop it. You're kidding me.
You can't get zeolite without aluminum. That's what it is.
So then what are these mom influencers? I just see it
they're basically using heavy metals to pull out other heavy metals. So zinc and copper, do it. If you're high in copper, give zinc and it'll detox you your copper. If you're high in zinc, give copper and it'll detox your zinc. So heavy metals can be used to detox metals, but using something like aluminum, which everyone's hopefully avoiding.
Yeah.
People don't know. They don't actually realize. They just hear someone, take zeolite for this, and they don't realize, wait, that's all aluminum, and it can get broken down by stomach acid, and then it'll get absorbed.
Okay. Couple questions. A lot of questions. Yeah. So the zeolite stuff, I've seen, many mom bloggers, which more power to them, I guess, but they were saying the zeolite, and I don't know if that's the brand or if that's the actual product. I haven't really looked into it.
Zeolite's the actual mineral. There's a bunch of different products out there.
Okay. Well, there's a product that people are saying it's a spray or whatever, and they spray it under their kid's tongue, and their kid was nonverbal and on the spectrum, had really dark under eyes, and they're within a couple of weeks or months, they're great. So what?
I don't doubt that.
Okay.
At all. I look at it as, what's the saying, is robbing Paul to feed Mary.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yes, thank you. I think it is. So like I said, metals can be used to detox other metals. So I do think it is detoxing and pulling out other metals. So the kid probably had some type of heavy metal issue, and then that helped to detox. But the problem is some of the aluminum is going to get left behind. And then if you look at other issues, aluminum can be linked to Alzheimer's, different things, many different neurological issues. So it can cause things later. Another thing that people always get kind of blown out when I mention is colloidal silver. Does colloidal silver work as an antibacterial? Yes, it does. But silver is a known neurotoxin. No one can argue with that. Silver, they've done studies that moms that took colloidal silver, it would get deposited in fetal brain tissue in their babies. So silver can work as an antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, but some of it's going to get left behind. It will accumulate and it will cause other issues later on, which is why I would rather use herbs or things like that don't have that same components that can be left behind and poison you for later in life.
Interesting. That's all very interesting. Okay, so then what would you say to a mom who's listening? I've never used the zeolite, but I know a lot of people have sent us to which is a really nice thing that they trust us, but they'll send it to us like, hey, do you think we should use this? And I'm like, don't ask me. I don't know. Research yourself. But what then, if people are considering making a purchase of a Zeolite product or something like that, how would you redirect them? Like where would you send them? What herb would you start with for kids, mostly because that's what I see a lot of that marketing.
I mean, for heavy metals specifically, the thing that I used most often is Takasumi, which Takasumi, it's charcoal, but it's made in a traditional Japanese way from bamboo. And Japanese textbooks will show it's like 10 times stronger than charcoal. Okay. And that's what I use probably like, I don't know, 80% of the time. That's what I use as the main detox method. And if you check it for lead, you check it for aluminum, you check it for heavy metals, it's extremely low, which is why I like that. I mean, there may be some extreme cases where someone needs the zeolite to detox them. And I understand if you've tried everything else, but there's a lot of other safer detox methods like Takasumi, or I'll sometimes use alpha lipoic acid, zinc, different things like that, that in my opinion generally work better. And they don't have that same potential side effect and cumulative neurotoxicity later in life. Yeah. If you try all those and they don't work, please go for the zeolite and give it a shot. There's worse things you could do. But again, you have to realize you're ingesting aluminum. And I would say most of the people that are doing things, I mean, if you're doing a sublingual, that's aluminum straight to the bloodstream, basically. Or most of the people that are doing things like that, their gut is not going to be at 100%. So if they have leaky gut, then it's going to be absorbed in full molecules into the bloodstream, and it is really going to get a lot more aluminum in the body than in someone that has a perfectly healthy intestinal tract.
Would you say, like, would you recommend leaky gut? Because we've also gotten messages about people who have need tips with leaky gut. So we took some questions, and so these are some of the questions that came up as well. But yeah, for leaky gut, would it be the Takasumi?
Not for that specifically. I mean, generally. So leaky gut, I would say pretty much everyone has it. If you have a health issue, especially if you have a GI issue, you have it. The biggest thing, in my opinion, that causes, I mean, you can argue glyphosate, that'll disrupt the junctions, that can definitely cause it. Foods that are inflammatory can cause it. You know, a lot of people use supplements to heal leaky gut. They use aloe, they use glutamine, they do different things like that. I never use those because, again, I look at leaky gut as a symptom, not a root cause. So most of the time, what happens is you have infections, bacterial, parasitic, viral, fungal. If you have those infections, it basically is like having someone on your roof putting holes in your roof with a hammer. And that's what leaky gut is. The holes where you absorb stuff are bigger, so you absorb food molecules before they're fully digested, and you start to have inflammatory reactions. So you want to avoid the foods that you're reacting to lower the inflammation, go after the infections, kill those off, and then the gut heals. Like you said, you know, our bodies were made to self-heal unless we gunk them up. So if we can get rid of the original cause, I don't find the need generally to give the aloe and the glutamine, the butyrate, and different things like that. And the gut will just heal on its own if you can get rid of the infections while avoiding the inflammatory foods. And in most cases, I'm talking like 3 to 8 weeks. I'm not talking months and months and months, but shorter periods of time.
That's interesting, because what I'm hearing is that what I'm boiling it down to is that people are overcomplicating things.
Yes, they are. And I understand why, but they are.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of people say like, oh, like you can't heal at all if you have leaky gut, and it's not like, I've never heard anybody say that it's not a root cause. So that's interesting to me. Yeah. And
I mean, I tell people I don't treat leaky gut. I treat a person and leaky gut goes away. Yeah. And, you know, that's my philosophy with a lot of things. You know, people call in all the times, and sometimes they mention diagnosis by different doctors, and I've never heard of it before. And I'm just like trying to Google, see what it is or something. And, you know, it's like, so it reminds me, I had a girl with cyclic vomiting syndrome. She was like 25 years old. Basically, ever since she got her cycle, she felt nauseous 24/7, 365 days a year. But basically, the week leading up to her cycle, she would basically just start vomiting every day, multiple times a day, until she had her cycle. And then it would just go with that low-level nausea for a month. She had all these health issues. She went keto on her own, and it helped a lot of her health issues. Didn't affect the cyclic vomiting whatsoever. I'll admit, when she called me on the phone, and I actually picked up, which is rare, I had no idea what cyclic vomiting was. I was Googling it as she said it. And I was very honest. I'm like, I treat people with hormone issues all the time. I've never treated that. But generally, if I work on the body to balance hormones, people often do well. So she came in. A lot of the times for women with hormonal issues, I see it's secondary to a fungus. So ovaries produce estrogen. Your liver has to break down estrogen, otherwise you get levels that are too high. And I would say a lot of women nowadays have too high levels of estrogen. You can look at the xenoestrogens and all that type of stuff. But if you have a fungal or candida infection, that produces nasty chemicals, benzene, acetaldehyde. Those are like skull and crossbones on the bottles. And they have to get broken down by your liver. So your liver is going to be way overstressed. So if you can get rid of the fungal issue, the liver is going to heal up, and then the liver can break down hormones properly. And so for her, I remember she had a fungal issue. So I went after the fungus with, I believe it was Malia, neem leaf. And then I don't often give things to support the liver, but sometimes I do. And for her, I gave her my favorite liver herb, Schizandra. And I think I gave her a B complex. And she was like 2 weeks before her next period. So about a week before the vomiting was about to start. And I was like, realistically, you're not going to be any different this next cycle. Let's shoot for 6 weeks. We have a great time. And she came back in 3 weeks later and she's like, this is the first time I haven't vomited on my cycle my whole life. Aww. So I didn't make that many changes on her. I mean, her diet was already pretty good. I think I might have cut caffeine out. I gave her something to kill a fungus, one herb. I gave her one herb to support her liver and a B complex, and she did amazing. So I do think people overcomplicate things, which I don't blame them. They're trying to get healthier. They're trying everything that they can. But I think sometimes taking a more simplistic approach works better in a lot of cases.
Well, if you think about the healthcare system, we've complicated it so much. We have all these different specialties to where nobody's actually talking to each other. There's, like there's the heart guy, the brain guy, the skin guy, the nerd. Like there's just so many. I can't even, like there's over 100 specialties or something like that right now. And it's so separated. There's no one talking to each other that I'm sure, I would hope that her OBGYN who probably diagnosed her with that would be like, hey, this isn't normal. Let's fix it. But I'm sure, my guess, and I'm just, maybe this isn't true, but in my mind, I'm like, she probably recommended birth control because that is their blanket Band-Aid that they're like, oh, you're having something wrong with you, female, in my office? Birth control will fix it. There you go.
Yes.
And it's just a mess. It's overcomplicated, but it's also a simple fix if you kind of set yourself up for success a little bit. That's kind of what I'm understanding.
No, I completely agree.
Oh man, I'm glad you were able to help her though. That sounds like a horrible condition that I've never heard of. And so if anyone's listening who has that, please.
Here we go.
Okay, I have just a couple rapid fire questions if that's okay.
Yep.
What is kinesiology?
Applied kinesiology is using muscle testing to evaluate how someone responds to different stimuli. So for me, there's many different ways to evaluate things. I use it to evaluate how people respond to different foods, different infections, different things like that. And it kind of gives me live answers and a sneak peek into what's going on in the body. It's different than lab tests. They both have positives and negatives. But generally, that's what I use to, like I mentioned earlier about sensitivity versus presence. So you might have a parasite inside you that's not causing any issues. So I use kinesiology to help me identify what are you having issues with, not what is in your body. And then what issues are going on, how do I address them?
Awesome. That's really cool. And you teach that.
Yes, my dad's been teaching applied kinesiology for, 37 years now, and I've been teaching with him the past 10 or so. We just actually got back from teaching in Rome and Toulouse, France, and we're going to be teaching in Atlanta and Nashville later this fall.
How do you, this isn't on my list of questions, but I'm just curious, how do you perceive how they handle their health stuff in like Rome, and you said Rome and Italy, is that, where did you say?
Rome and Italy and France.
Italy and France, okay. Versus the US. Like, is it like, oh, yep, that's great information to know. We apply it. It's great. Like, is there a reception? Like, is there like a more cognitive dissonance in the U.S. versus over there?
I think the people that come to listen to us are already on the same page as us.
You're right.
So it's a little bit different. I mean, the weird things over in Italy, and my dad and I are going to do a long talk on this sometime, but it's like no one is, I don't know if I should say this, no one's fat over there. I mean, look at the US versus look at people walking around Italy. Yes, they walk more, but everyone eats gluten. Everyone eats ice cream. Everyone drinks espresso. Everyone smokes. Everyone drinks wine. What the heck is going on over there versus here? I don't know. I mean, you can make a lot of different cases, and I think they have a lot of little things they have going for them. But I really do think, especially like Italy and France, people over there are way healthier than we are. And I don't have a full answer on that, but it was pretty remarkable.
I've heard things that like people can go over there and eat their gluten and have no side effects.
So using the testing that we do, we always have people test each other in seminars. And let's say like 60 to 70% of people might show up on gluten, or maybe 50% on nightshades, or 60, 70% on caffeine. I would say less than a third of the people showed up on those in Europe than do in the US, which really shocked us. Still, some people did, but as a whole, they seem to handle stuff way better.
Do you think it's just years of their parents not eating heavily sprayed grains and vegetables? And they're probably their cattle and livestock that they harvest aren't like ours. They're not crammed in pens. They're roaming pastures,
I think there's so many different things. I mean, I think the average food quality is much better. I really do. I think people walk a lot more. I think people relax and focus on community more. Yeah. Air conditioning is very rare, and you sweat a lot more, which has to be good for you.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they still spray, but they use less than we do. So that's why it's a little hard to say for sure. But I think like what you mentioned is definitely part of the reason.
Yeah. You had shared a reel of how you use sinus rinses. I thought it was hilarious, but also very cool. But it caught me off guard a little. Like, it caught me off guard a little. So tell me about that reel.
Most of the time when people have sinus issues, I just give them things orally, and sinus clears up. For years and years on some tough sinus cases, my dad has had people snort berberine or golden seal or golden thread, and it's worked really well to get something straight into the nasal cavity. The thing is, most people don't want to snort powders, besides the whole cultural norms. It's just kind of weird. It's kind of unpleasant. I don't do it often, but I've had patients do it with like chronic sinus issues, and they've gone away. Yeah. And they found 95% of chronic sinusitis cases have mold living in their nose. So it's not just bacteria. And so a friend of mine, Rain, she had basically started using this this nasal rinse thing, and she puts it in, and it works way better. It's way more pleasant. I think it does a better job. So we thought it'd be kind of fun to show you can snort it if you have it, or you can really do a rinse. It's kind of like a neti pot on steroids and really clean out the nasal cavity. And it's funny, I bet 10 people over the weekend messaged me saying, hey, I had these sinus issues and I did it, and I felt so much better right away. And some people said it'd been going on for months. So I'm like, wow, I love it.
So I saw that. I sent it to my husband because he has had, he said he had a very different upbringing than I did. But he was I think 10 or 12 when they went in surgically and did something to his sphenoid sinus because, but if you look at his upbringing, there was no option, but you had to drink a big glass of milk with every single meal because at that time in the 80s, he was like, that was the marketing of like got milk and you have to drink milk with, and it's all like pasteurized, not like, you know, good milk. And so like he always had sinus issues, and he didn't correlate it until he met me. And he was like, oh, like maybe it's because I have a dairy sensitivity. And so I'm ordering some Golden Seal and gonna try it with him because he has one of those things, because he has such chronic sinus issues. So I will let you know how it goes, and I'll let our audience knows how it goes. But I just thought that it caught me off guard. It was just funny. I was like, this is great. I was like, I was caught off guard. Okay, covered that. Okay, fevers. A lot of people are afraid of fevers for their kids. I would love to hear just your thoughts on that real quick, and I'll let you go.
I mean, fevers are part of our God-given immune system to fight off infections. Most infections have a very narrow temperature and very narrow pH that they can survive and thrive on. So your body raising the temperature is a way to fight off the infection. So, but obviously temperatures can get out of control if your immune system isn't working correctly or it's overworking. So, you know, fevers, especially in young kids, they're not pleasant. But if you're 101, 102, 103, let the fever ride it out. It's helping kill the infection. If you take something to lower the temperature, then it's going to make the illness last longer because you're stopping the body from fighting it off. You know, 104, everyone has to draw their line. 104 makes me, it really depends on how the child is acting. You know, if your child's lethargic and limp, you're way past it. You need to do something. You know, if your child's just crying nonstop, understood. But I will tell my kids, you know, this fever is fighting it off. 103, that's a good thing. You know, if it's 104, 105, you might need to take them somewhere or give something. But generally, I think fevers are great in the sense of they're helping fight off. And the thing you got to realize too is, you know, so much of the fever medication, I mean, in addition, let's say if you give acetaminophen, which is going to be a liver stress, or deplete glutathione, you know, if you look at ibuprofen, it's going to stress the kidneys. What else do they add in the kids' meds? They all add sucralose or aspartame. They all add Red 40. They all add all these different stuff. Whenever we travel now, I take a bottle of Genexa fever-reducing medication. It's acetaminophen, but it's kids, and it has no dyes, no artificial sugars. It's basically acetaminophen and organic agave syrup. My goal is to never use it, but I'd rather have it if we needed it. We just traveled for 4 weeks and the bottle is still in the box. But, you know, I'd rather have that than if, let's say, God forbid, something happened, I had to give him something. At least I have something that's a little more natural than adding in the food dye and the sucralose and all of those types of things.
Right. Because I hear a lot all the time, like, oh yeah, my kid had a fever, and then I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't, because their brain fears fevers, and I get it. I was like, I mean, I didn't have kids when I learned that stuff, so like now that I have a kid, I'm like, oh, it's fine. Like, I'll keep track of it, watch, observe, because I am her expert. I know exactly, you know, like I know pretty much everything about her, so like I can identify if something is wrong. But women are, a lot of people are just so afraid of fevers that they're like, oh, immediately ibuprofen, immediately a fever reducer, immediately take them to the doctor to mitigate the symptoms. But like, to my knowledge, and like basically what you said is that it sets the immune system up for the future if like they were to encounter that bacteria, infection, whatever happened in the first place. Like they're better off to fight it than to like interfere when the body's doing its thing. Like God doesn't design broken systems.
100%. I mean, let's say, God forbid, you know, 105, you get a febrile seizure. My kids have never had one. I've never had one, but it would be scary. I will be honest.
Oh, for sure.
But it's not dangerous. You know, I would probably give something before they got a febrile seizure, just since I don't want my kids to go through that. But it actually isn't dangerous. I mean, brain damage doesn't happen until like 107, 108. So
that's not what they tell us, though. I've not heard that. Like I always said, someone always said 105. I don't know where I heard that, but
105 you can get febrile seizures, but they are actually completely harmless. Again, I don't want my kids to do that. Right. If I was a 105, I would probably break down and give them something. I will be honest there.
Yeah.
But it's actually not dangerous to have a febrile seizure if you look at the research. I know Natural Nurse Mom has done a lot of good posts on that. Lauren's gone through all the different research about fevers and different things, which is really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there anything you have in your kit because I saw that you posted that you took, so that's where some of those questions come from. But that of like something beforehand, is there like when you travel, because obviously you're exposed to different bacteria and stuff, then is there a support that you give them, or are you just trusting and like a support for yourself that
if my kids get sick, I'm giving them stuff right away.
Okay.
Some people use different homeopathy things to try to lower the fever. I've never really used that. But like if my kids were getting sick, I brought for the younger ones acerola, which is really high in vitamin C. Or I brought elderberry, which is a good antiviral, or scutellaria, which is a good antifungal and antibacterial. Or I brought zinc. I actually brought a big bag of stuff because we were gone for so long.
Yeah.
But I don't like to just not do anything. I think that's wrong. I think you need to support your kids. So if that's, doing elderberry, if that's doing vitamin C, doing things like that, I think are really important to help their body fight off the infection, and ideally will help prevent the fever from getting out of control.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Noah. I really appreciate it. Is there anything final before we wrap up that you want to share that you feel like we didn't cover, that or encouragement to people who listened, and also where to direct them to connect with you?
A couple things I would say is, you guys are all starting in the journey, which is amazing. You should be proud of that. And getting back to the basics of eating whole food, that's going to set up everyone for life in every aspect. And it's never too late to change. But sometimes you got to look around at the bandwagon of, like you mentioned, if you have sinus issues, you might want to try cutting out dairy, even raw A2 grass-fed dairy for a couple weeks. See if it helps. Don't be afraid. Try cutting out gluten and oats, even if organic sourdough. See, they might be fine with you, but they might not. So don't trust that it's perfect for everyone. And, personally, I find getting back to the basics, using different God-given herbs, avoiding foods that shouldn't be foods, and just eating whole foods is really the best thing that you can do. And also don't give up hope if you are really ill. There are ways to get people better, and just don't give up hope.
Thank you so much. Where can people find you and connect with you and see all your things?
My Instagram honestly has most of my stuff, Dr._Noah DC. That has a lot of things on there. Anything that I talk about, I try to respond to questions. I'm getting a little bad at it, but I really try my best. I have a website in my practice with some blogs. I do see patients in Hawaii. I generally don't do remote clients, but because my dad and I have taught all over the world, mostly the US, but all over the world, if people are looking for a doctor similar to us, feel free to reach out. And I'm always happy to try to connect them with someone that we've trained and has a similar healing method to what we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Noah Lebowitz, for your time, and we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We will see you next week.
Thanks for being with us today. Follow us on Instagram at @underthesun_podcast. We'd love to meet you.
Please help us out by subscribing on YouTube and leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next time. Please remember this information is made available to you for informational and educational purposes only. It is in no way a substitute for medical advice.